On this site in Buffalo, New York, on September 6, 1901, President William McKinley was shot twice in the stomach by Leon Saglas. He died 8 days later. Saglas had lost his job at the Cleveland Rolling Mill Company during the Depression of 1893. This pushed him into becoming a labor union activist and eventually an anarchist out to dismantle the entire capitalist system. This is what led him to Buffalo in 1901. McKinley was seen as a yes man for the capitalist class, living proof of the type of power they held over government. There was no mystery as to why someone like Saglas would want to assassinate him. McKinley's vice president, former New York Governor Theodore Roosevelt, assumed office as the youngest president in U.S. history. The young new president was very much in tune with the progressive wave overtaking the country. As a Harvard graduate, he received a similar education to many other young progressives, one that stressed empirical evidence and data. Roosevelt faced his first challenge only after a few months in office. Anthracite coal miners in Pennsylvania went on strike in May 1902. They were part of a powerful new union, the United Mine Workers. The UMW wanted an 8-hour workday, a 20% raise, and for company owners to recognize them as a legitimate bargaining agent, what is called collective bargaining. Miners and owners in Pennsylvania had fought many wars against each other before. Back in the 1870s, the owners broke strikes with the help of the media and private police. The workforce had changed since then, going from predominantly Irish to a mix of Polish, Hungarian, and Italian immigrants. The UMW overcame this ethnic diversity to build a powerful union. The strike represented some of the worst progressive fears: organized rich people at war with organized poor people. The progressive President Roosevelt would be caught in the middle. He tried to avoid getting involved at first, but as time went on, there was a real danger that the country would not have coal for the winter, and he would certainly get the blame. He arranged to meet the mine owners and union leaders in Washington. Roosevelt thought the workers were reasonable and open to compromise. The owners struck him as selfish and short-sighted. The meeting confirmed what many progressives already felt about the upper classes. In the end, Roosevelt used the threat of force to end the strike. If the owners did not compromise, he would send the military in to operate the mines. Owners would lose millions of dollars in the process. They agreed to binding arbitration, meaning the White House would make a decision that both sides would have to follow. The workers received a 10% wage increase and a 9-hour day. They did not receive official recognition as the bargaining agent of the workers. What made Roosevelt's response special was he didn't send in troops to shoot at workers like so many previous presidents. At the same time, he gave the mine owners a good chunk of what they wanted. It was a perfect progressive compromise, one that found a middle ground between rich and poor while keeping the peace. We tend to see Roosevelt today as a progressive hero, someone who shook things up in Washington. While there is certainly truth to this, we have to remember how conservative he was, how safe he played things, and how, at the end of the day, he played nice with capital owners. He might have been different, but he was no radical. In fact, Roosevelt brokered the compromise with the help of arch-capitalist J.P. Morgan. Roosevelt believed it was better to work with the Morgans of the world instead of against them. He believed in harmony between the business world and the government. For his part, Morgan also craved harmony. He, Rockefeller, and others had grown to dislike the vicious competition in capitalism celebrated by social Darwinists. They saw competition as destructive. It made business unpredictable. Harmony was better than competition. And they tried to bring harmony through creating trusts, combinations of companies that dominated entire industries. In 1882, John D. Rockefeller created Standard Oil, a trust that controlled the largest oil refining businesses. In 1901, J.P. Morgan formed United States Steel, a corporation that united many of the major steel businesses, including Andrew Carnegie's, who sold out to Morgan and retired. U.S. Steel was part of what historians have called the Great Merger Wave of the late 1890s into the early 1900s. A merger is when companies combine into bigger companies. It was an effort by business owners to bring harmony into the capitalist system by reducing destructive competition. There was one question. Was this even legal? In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act to outlaw combinations that restrain trade, to paraphrase the law. Didn't Standard Oil and U.S. Steel restrain trade? Apparently not, since the government hadn't stopped them. In fact, the government was much more likely to use the Sherman Act to crush strikes, since striking workers also restrained trade. But what did Roosevelt think? In 1902, Morgan put Roosevelt to the test. Aside from being in banking and steel, Morgan was in railroads. Competition between railroads was always vicious. To stop this, Morgan created the Northern Securities Company, which dominated the rail lines in the North. In 1904, Roosevelt and the federal government sued the Northern Securities Company for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. Morgan was horrified. At a famous meeting between Morgan and Roosevelt, Morgan asked if the president intended to sue any of his other companies. Roosevelt assured him he did not, unless he suspected they were breaking the law. In the end, the federal government won its lawsuit against Morgan. The Northern Securities Company was broken up, although Morgan remained in control of a good chunk of the rail industry. Roosevelt gained the reputation as a trust buster, a nickname that follows him even today. Despite this, Morgan maintained friendly relations with Roosevelt throughout the rest of his presidency. Roosevelt's cordial relationship with Morgan was quite different from his relationship with the oil baron John D. Rockefeller. Roosevelt went on to sue Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust as well, and won, forcing Standard Oil to break up. To Roosevelt, Morgan was a responsible businessman. Rockefeller was not. Morgan's trusts were mostly good trusts. Standard Oil was a bad trust. Morgan had proven to be conscientious. He tried to bring harmony to the economy. He even bailed out the federal government under President Cleveland. Rockefeller was selfish and dishonest, using dirty tricks like railroad rebates to gain control of the oil industry. Roosevelt didn't hate trusts. In fact, Roosevelt only sued 6 of them during his first term, a tiny fraction of the ones that actually existed. For a guy with the nickname Trust Buster, he was very selective as to which trusts he busted. He claimed he only opposed bad trusts and wanted to protect good trusts. There was certainly truth to this, as we've seen in his relationships with Morgan and Rockefeller, but there was more. In 1904, the journalist Ida Tarbell published her History of the Standard Oil Company. It exposed many of the underhanded practices Rockefeller used to drive competition out of business, including Tarbell's own father. Tarbell's journalism was part of the same tradition as Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives. They both exposed the dirty underside of capitalism, causing widespread outrage throughout the country. Roosevelt had a name for journalists like Riis and Tarbell: muckrakers. To him, muckrakers were like the man who could look no way but down, with the muck rake in his hand, but continued to rake to himself the filth of the floor. He felt that muckrakers were people who wallowed in dirt. It wasn't a compliment. Roosevelt believed they spent so much time in the dirt that they ignored the good things. Muckraking journalism forced him to take action, and he didn't always appreciate it, but he was a master of taking advantage of it. Roosevelt is so important because, for the first time, he used the power of the federal government to bring order to the economy. He used his power to fight the social Darwinist competition that had caused so much destruction, and that progressives hated so much. This is why he is seen as a progressive hero, but his efforts were also appreciated by people like Morgan, who had dedicated his career to bringing harmony to the economy. Roosevelt's ability to appeal to both progressives and the business community made him a master politician and the most effective president since Abraham Lincoln. It was no wonder that he was elected to his own term in the election of 1904.